A specialized developmental exercise is one in which you're highly confident, if not you can guarantee, that there's going to be transfer to the competition exercise because it's so highly specific. So for example, if I'm a hammer thrower and I pick like throwing the weight, maybe I'm going to be highly confident that will transfer to throwing the hammer further. Now, if I'm a field sport athlete and my competition exercise is basically sprinting in the context of sport, so different starting positions, making decisions, changing direction, all that kind of stuff, and I take a tenth off of my 10-meter time, does that guarantee me or predict with a high level of confidence that I'm going to beat more defenders, score more tries, make more tackles? And the answer is, unfortunately, no. And Jake makes the point, that's because you've completely negated the influence of technical skill, tactical awareness, and decision making in the performance of that skill.
That was physical preparation coach Keir Wenham-Flatt talking about building speed in context of team sport development. You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Simply Faster. Simply Faster is an online athletic performance technology shop distributing items such as the Freelap timing system, GymAware, K-Box, 1080 Sprint, and the Speed Mat. I've gotten many of these items from Simply Faster and can confidently say that they make today's best training technology available to everybody. The Freelap timing system has revolutionized both my practices and my athlete assessments, allowing me to look at the 10-meter fly capability of dozens of athletes in a matter of seconds. It is wireless, compact, portable, and incredibly versatile. The K-Box and 1080 Sprint are fantastic tools for any coach looking to build speed, agility, and implement training scenarios that go beyond the traditional weight room. The 1080 Sprint is being used by great coaches training some of the fastest sprinters in the world, and it truly represents high-performance speed training. I can personally attest that Simply Faster's customer service is second to none. Christopher at Simply Faster responds quickly to queries, and anyone who makes a purchase from Simply Faster is in good hands. If you want to acquire some of the best high-tech training equipment available, stop by simplyfaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com. They are the future of coaching technology. Hello, coaches, athletes, parents, trainers, and whoever else is randomly listening to the show. This is Joel Smith, bringing you episode 125 of the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today we got my man, Keir Wenham-Flatt. I've known Keir, or known of Keir, for a long time, but for some reason, strange reason, I let 124 episodes go by before we actually sat down and were able to chat. And man, Keir is one brilliant dude, and it's awesome stuff. You know, the more I do this show, I'm like a movement guy, a speed guy, apply metrics. I like lifting too. But my muse is always, how does the human body move? Maybe that caters more towards individual sports. The show is continually getting me out of boxes. And if you are a sports performance coach, strength coach, physical preparation coach, whatever they call it these days at your institution, there's probably a few names for it. I think we're learning as a community that just merely living in the weight room and not having an intimate understanding of what is going on the field and how athletes play better, how they can use their speed in play, the positions and the perception and the reaction and opening and closing perception loops faster, as Keir's going to get to. That's a huge part of it. And if you've been listening to the recent episodes, honestly, I feel like it all was really kicked off with the one we did with Sean Mishka, Michael Zwiefel, and Scott Salwasser. That's just caused this snowball for me personally of just seeing more and more and more what it takes to, we all want to get people faster, right, and stronger and more confident. And there's the mental side of it all too, but what it takes to help teams win. What can we do to create transfer in every last ounce of our program? Keir is an absolute savage when it comes to program design around the field sport athlete, not only in terms of finding transfer through conditioning means and speed and coordination, recreating game speed, but also creating a robustness in the athlete that needs to be good for multiple games throughout a season rather than peaking at single competitions. He's particularly well versed in rugby. He's coached professional teams on multiple continents. He is the founder of rugbystrengthcoach.com. He is currently a strength and conditioning specialist at the College of William and Mary, and before that he was at Richmond, University of Richmond with Jay DeMayo. So not only is Keir awesome at rugby, but he has experience with multiple sports. So for today's show, Keir's going to chat a little bit about, this is a common buzzword, especially with the Bosch world, and as well as too, we've done this podcast with John Kyler. He's going to talk about his ideas on coordination training for field sports. He's going to talk about building a robust athlete versus just a Ferrari, and what type of athlete is more adaptable in the team sport environment. He's going to talk about the specific ways that he develops energy systems and conditioning for field sport athletes, specifically rugby, but really applicable to any collision sport. He's going to talk about, and this is really cool, how to measure linear, basically game speed versus sport speed, or game speed versus track speed, game speed versus 40-yard dash speed, and some facets and interesting nuances there. He's going to talk about what mental toughness really is in context and how to train for it. I know we hear mental toughness and instantly check out, but mental toughness is a thing, but just its context, as with everything. Finally, he's going to talk about the health performance spectrum in sports performance, and as well as his take on using Milan Jovanović's agile periodization system. So this is a real treat, no matter what sport you work with, system you work with, whether you're track, physical prep, personal trainer. There's great stuff for everybody in this episode, and I really enjoyed finally getting to connect with Keir Wenham-Flatt. So let's get on to the show. Keir, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here today, man.
Pleasure, mate. I've been a fan for a long time, so it's an honor to be on. I'm not sure I've earned my place to be on, given the level of people that you have on, but yeah, it's a pleasure.
No, I've been, hey, likewise. No, I've been following you for a while as well, and no, I'm super excited to talk to you. We had just talked, 5 minutes ago, how you're a big team sport guy. I'm like, well, I'm kind of the opposite. I'm really into individual sports. I just typecasted myself a little bit, but I'm excited to learn from you all the things that I think I try to think about with field sports and team sports in the regards of a lot of speed training and coordination, all that stuff, and. Well, I don't know, we were kind of just talking about this, but, variability and coordination training and I mean, for sprinting or sport or skill movements, I think is a really interesting topic. And so what's your thought on all of that work for rugby? I guess that's like the most broad or general question in the world, but,
yeah.
Okay. But in terms of let's just say this, in terms of coordination, what's your just take on the idea of quote unquote coordination training for team or field sports? What does that mean to you?
Well, I would approach it from like a completely different angle. So have you read any of the books of Nassim Taleb?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so robustness or anti-fragility. So, fragile things break or fail to respond to environments which are variable, volatile, highly unpredictable, all that kind of stuff. And things which are robust are able to function under unpredictable, variable environments, and things which are anti-fragile actually thrive under those environments. And if you think about the stopwatch sports, they tend to be a lot more predictable and manageable environments that you can prepare athletes for a very narrow set of demands, physically, tactically, technically, psychologically, compared to the field-based sports. So if you think about all the different variables that are at play in the team-based sports, they are highly volatile, highly unpredictable, highly variable. Weather, opposition, playing style, pitch dimensions, position of player, ball, all around you, stuff like that. That is almost the definition of those environments. And we have athletes that are trying to execute motor patterns and respond to different situations on the field of play. So we have to strive for athletes which are robust to those demands. And that's kind of a realization I've come to in the last year, and I wrote it down, which is extreme specialization is the enemy of robustness. The Bugatti Veyron is the fastest production car in the world, or it was. But if the zombie apocalypse hit tomorrow, you'd want to be driving a Toyota Hilux because it's the most robust. There's a reason all the terrorists are driving that and not a sports car in Afghanistan, because it's extremely robust to unpredictable environments. And the challenge for me in team sports is making athletes that are specialized enough to excel at a narrow number of skills, but at the same time be robust to unpredictable environments. And that has been the biggest value to me in trying to understand the role of variability and coordination in sporting movement in field-based sports, from guys like Franz Bosch, Chris Corfist, John Pryor. And that is an extremely wordy answer. Did that answer a little bit?
No doubt. I think that you look at the visualization, like, Prius versus a Bugatti, right? And like, to me, one of the really cool things about working with, well, and probably the most outside of being my track and field background, I work with tennis players, and there's a little more, it's just like there's a different skill set to how they move. Like track, it's like, okay, out of the blocks, you're going to be here with your position. This is what happens to your shins and your arms, and here's the timing. And then, well, team sports, it's like you're moving, it's like, okay, and then you have top end speed. So you have two things if you're coaching sprinters, but it's like, okay, tennis, you have the serve, the split step, rotation, like, and then you got rugby, and it's like, how many more skills are on top of that you have to have some sort of coaching plan for. And so, do you want to get into like how do you go about approaching speed and movement in a field sport, in light of some of those principles of coordination and being robust?
So, how I try to approach motor learning, a real big influence on me has been Jeff Moyer. So DC Sports Training. He's obviously a real big yeses guy, and I've tried to marry up those different ideas together. But what really struck me about speaking to him is he calls it the concept of hard skill and soft skill. So, and Franz Bosch would call this fluctuators and attractors. So the attractors or the hard skill are those elements of the motor pattern which never change from rep to rep. They're always going to be the same. And elite performers are going to be able to get into those attractor states very, very quickly and very, very consistently, in whatever movement pattern it is they're going to use. And then you have fluctuators or soft skill. Those are the conditions which change from rep to rep. And we have to create situations for athletes to experience and explore those fluctuators so they're able to be prepared for those demands. So what I try and do with my athletes is first put them in an environment where we're making it as simple as possible for them to find those attractor states. And I think the terminology is deepen the attractor wells, make it easier for them to get into those positions in whatever skill it is we're doing. Cement it again and again and again in a closed environment. And then once you've done that, then you have to start providing them with the opportunity to explore those fluctuator states and learn how to tweak and modify the motor patterns that they're performing in variable environments first. And then lastly, I try and put them in a situation where they can solve problems with what they're doing. So we add in a tactical or problem solving component, because once you take that cognitive attention away from the skill and start putting it towards a sporting problem, normally with rugby players, that's when it turns to absolute crap. So you have to, and until you see an improvement in speed on the field of play, it doesn't matter how much you've improved their 40 in training, for example, because it has to be applied on the field of play. And then lastly is executing the game. So the 4 phases I would say for us is closed environment, attractors. Then we go into more of an open environment or variable conditions, fluctuators. Then we put them in strict drills where we're shaping the task so that without knowing it, you have to demonstrate the behavior that I want to see and solve a problem. And then lastly, we're going to put you in a highly contextual environment, maybe a team environment, where you have to execute that in the conditions of the game. And I think the more control you exert on the situation, the more likely it is you're going to see the behavior that you want to see. But there's going to be less context and less validity. And then the less control you exert over the situation, the more realism you're going to see, but the more the athlete is going to revert to type. So it's a question of what's appropriate and when during the athlete's career, during the preparation, stuff like that.
Yeah, I'd imagine too, especially for older athletes, established athletes versus younger athletes, it probably changes quite a bit.
Absolutely. I was like, a colleague of mine, Graham Morris in Australia, every time he sees something that upsets him on social media, he sends it to me with a few four-letter words. And it's like, for example, if you have athletes that are incapable of controlling their bodies in, let's say, a build-up, not even a maximal sprint, should you stick a water bag on their back and start doing wickets from a standing start? No. So it becomes a question of tailoring the complexity and the difficulty of the skill that you're putting in front of the athlete relative to their development and where they are in their training.
Yeah, it's like the more I have learned about the team, I mean, it's all through podcasts I've learned about more of the team sport, field sport training. Otherwise, I would have very little ideas on many regards. But I remember hearing, I forget what podcast it was on exactly. It might have been Mike Robertson's. It was Dave Tenney was talking about, well, it's like, well, I got a guy faster. But then he was like, just end up off sides, and unless you can, and then like, that's crazy. Like, in the sense of, I always like to think of, track and field as this like super complex, you could really get into all the movements, and team sport just run. But it's like, no, like field sports, like really there's a lot to it. Like there is so much to, and like you had just gone through your layers of how to coach it. It's like if you mess up or miss one of the layers, it almost doesn't matter. Like you got faster and then you still got tackled in the backfield, or you couldn't put it together with the system.
Well, here's the thing, right? So Jake Jensen, who's the translator for Bondarchuk, speaking to him, speaking to Graham, and trying to get, obviously I can't speak to Bondarchuk directly because he doesn't speak English, but then speaking to Jake, asking the question of, this system really makes sense. His results speak for themselves in the throws. How do we take those concepts and apply them to field-based sports? And the answer is kind of like with great difficulty, because if you look at like that level of specialized developmental exercises in the stopwatch sports and for example track, because I know Jonas uses a similar system with the sprints. A specialized developmental exercise is one in which you're highly confident, if not you can guarantee, that there's going to be transfer to the competition exercise because it's so highly specific. So for example, if I'm a hammer thrower and I pick like throwing the weight, maybe I'm going to be highly confident that will transfer to throwing the hammer further. Now, if I'm a field sport athlete and my competition exercise is basically sprinting in the context of sport, so different starting positions, making decisions, changing direction, all that kind of stuff, and I take a tenth off of my 10-meter time, does that guarantee me or predict with a high level of confidence that I'm going to beat more defenders, score more tries, make more tackles? And the answer is, unfortunately, no. And Jake makes the point, that's because you've completely negated the influence of technical skill, tactical awareness, and decision making in the performance of that skill. So if you're not considering those variables, pure physical development is specialized preparatory at best, in that it gives you the opportunity to then develop specialized preparation. But that's the challenge in team sports, is because until you incorporate those elements, it's effectively like general specific at best. And to incorporate those elements, you need to do a really good job of either building trust in that the sport coach will let you do it, or educating the sport coach to say, actually, we need to work together on this stuff to realize performance on the field of play. And I think you see this all the time. People talk about game speed. You see it in football at the combine, say, well, not the best 40, but he's got game speed. And to me, the difference between game speed and combine speed is the ability to take that game speed, so that combine speed, incorporate the tactical, technical elements, and execute it on the field of play. And that's the real big challenge to me.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Oh, right on. And the only way it's really going to happen is if the sport coaches and the sports performance strength coaches can be speaking the same language. They have the same vocabulary, and they can work together on it in a way. Otherwise, I think it's really hard, because it's almost like an industry that was a little bit born out of the barbell, and 20 years ago had absolutely nothing to do with any of this stuff. It's almost to try to merge in, you have to have that. There has to be the mutual respect and talk on both ends that can have that conversation.
And that's the challenge. Like the environment I'm in right now, very very lucky in that, we lock the doors behind them once a month, and they don't have to, but we get to present to our sport coaches once a month for half an hour on high performance concepts, so that they have a basic understanding of what it is we're trying to achieve. And likewise, our athletic performance coaches, our athletic trainers, have to make a good attempt to understand the tactics and technique and game model of the sports that they're working with, so that everyone is trying to have a fundamental understanding of what everyone around them is trying to do, but specialize in their own area, so that we're able to integrate everyone together. And that's what Eric does as the high performance manager. He's the conductor, trying to make everyone play the same tune.
Oh, that's really cool, man. I like it a lot. I'd like to go into actually like a few little kind of practical examples. And before we were talking about John Pryor, and then I've had John Kiley say this too on the show, but like there should be like a 20 or 30%, you were saying, like error rate, like when you're introducing these skills or the coordination training. Like it shouldn't be so routine and easy that you're just doing the same drill over and over again and think you're accomplishing something. Like there has to be the novelty factor, the learning factor. So how do you take us through, like, maybe a system or a series where an athlete might present a certain way and something that you would try to accomplish? And I always think of like failure rate too. I'm like, well, what does that even mean? I mean, I don't have the experience. Like, did you trip over a cone? Did you miss the pass? Like, what does that mean?
Well, let's go completely the other way. So if you go into the typical North American football weight room and you watch the boys do A skips, B skips, toe pops, all that kind of stuff, that is the antithesis of what the two Johns are talking about, because they're having a conversation, their mind's somewhere else, they're thinking about what they had for breakfast, all that kind of stuff, and they're still able to do the drills. And if you speak to John Kiley, what he talks about is there has to be risk, there has to be relevance, there has to be a challenge in order to grab your attention. It has to grab your attention. If there's no attention, there's no learning. If there's no learning, there's no adaptation. And I think it's almost like you can see it on guys' faces when you present them with a drill. It's like you can see the anxiety of like all the wobbles of them trying to figure out and execute those drills. But I think, obviously I'm still learning all of this stuff myself, but if you think about the example we talked about with the fluctuator states or soft skill, what can change from rep to rep if we run on the rugby field? Maybe I'm carrying a ball, not carrying a ball. Stiffness of the ground, whether somebody's grabbing onto me, pushing me over, center of gravity, start position, the task I have to perform during the sprint, maybe the angle of my torso. I think there was a paper came out recently, 60 to 70% of sprints in field-based sports are done with a turned torso to face an opponent, to face the ball, stuff like that. Everything is a skill, and if you're not learning that skill, you're not prepared. So how do I present athletes with variety and different tasks? I'll try and vary all of those things at some point, but this is the challenge, is in collegiate athletics and in team-based sports, there has to be a degree of systematization where you're trying to clone yourself and get people around you to deliver a relatively consistent level of service to the athletes, because you want some kind of predictable outcome. And then coming up with variations of drills to expose your athletes to, whilst at the same time be variable, facilitate learning, all that kind of stuff. That's the challenge. But for me, I change surfaces, I change body positions, I change start positions, I will change center of gravity. So I like the Tony Holler progression. Use your arms, hands on hips, hands crossed across the body, hands on ears. He calls it the French 41, which is hands up, the French surrender. Pistol, dowel overhead, pressing. If you want to go, to quote Jeff Moyer, full Bosch, you can start to add the water bags, crazy weights, all that kind of stuff. And if you think about You add in a few different surfaces, you add in a few different skills, a few different body positions with all of those conditions. That's 50 or something drills right there. And then you can progress with speed, timing, reps per side, all that kind of stuff. But it's a mixed bag. I will say, though, a thing that I took away from Chris Corfus this year is that you don't necessarily do high variability or difficult drills for the performance of those drills themselves. You're doing them for the subsequent effects when you take it away. So providing variability and complexity to a drill might not help you run faster. Then once it's taken away, you're going to find those attractor states more quickly and tolerate those fluctuator states more quickly. And that's one thing that I think learning from John Pryor with that kind of stuff is it going to make you run faster? The answer is I don't know. And I said this to John Kiley and he disagreed with me, but if you look at Jamaican track and field, I doubt those guys have ever even seen a water bag. And they have all these guys running crazy times. Jonas, for example, has guys that are some of the fastest athletes in the UK. He does not go down that rabbit hole. So you can run extremely fast without going full Bosch. But what I think it allows you to do in field-based sports is it allows you to preserve your speed under variable conditions, which is the name of the game, because you're never going to be running in a perfect straight line in a closed environment in team-based sports. There's always going to be something trying to push you off, and it's how well can you preserve your speed in those conditions.
Right on. I like what you said about the tilted torso. I had no idea it was that high of a percentage, because what comes to mind when I think about coordination drills, like what John Pryor is doing in rugby, I think of a guy running with his torso and I'm coming off a microphone to do this at 45 degrees or turning back and forth. And I think to myself, whoa, like basically if you're training team sports, that's super easy. Just the easiest thing you could do is just say, okay, we're going to take this battery that I already have and just do it with a tilted torso or tilt back and forth and those types of things.
For sure. But it's like, I think you to earn the right to do certain drills, you have to do it. You have to do it not perfectly. You have to master it or do it. Have a high level of mastery first in a more simple variation. So, for example, if you cannot run with a decent level of efficiency and mastery in a straight line when no one's touching you, should we break out the torso turning, have someone push you over, add some instability, or change the start position yet? No, I would argue no. But by that same token, are you prepared for the highly unpredictable environments of team sports if you only ever run in a straight line? And the answer is obviously no. So if everything's a skill, you have to be able to sprint from your belly, half kneeling, side on, jogging start, walking start, all that kind of stuff. These are environments which athletes have to be robust to. And I put it up on Instagram the other week. Whatever situation it is, physically, tactically, technically, or psychologically, that you're going to put your athletes in on the field of play, you don't want that to be the first time they've ever done it, because the results are not going to be pretty. So you're trying to prepare as much as possible for what they're going to face.
Within all this work too, Keir, what's your take on like the perception, the action, the using humans or a ball or external stimuli within the course of this training?
Absolutely massive, because I forget the paper, but if you put elite and sub-elite games players through a closed environment change of direction drill, absolutely no difference between elite and sub-elite. So if you look at like the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, it's not in the action, it's in the ability to perceive one's environment, process information to derive meaning from it, to run synthesis and analysis. Analysis is, what does all this information mean? What is going to be the most successful scenario for me? Which of these actions should I select? How should I execute it? And then put it into action and be able to close that loop as quickly as possible, because if we're competing and I close my loop faster, you have to reset yours. If you look at the research, if you look at your elite athletes playing sport, and then you look at those numbers of change of direction, like, hang on, something doesn't add up here, you realize that the key difference, again with game speed, lies in the ability to perceive the environment, derive meaning, select an action, and then execute it. And an analogy I use a lot is everyone will agree Roger Federer is an extremely agile athlete. Now, if you put him in table tennis, is he going to be just as agile? And the answer is no, because even though the movements are extremely similar, staying square to the opponent, shuffling laterally, and executing skills, the timing, the nature of the sensory information that he's presented with is completely alien to him. So he's not going to be agile, and vice versa. This is why track and field athletes, for doping bans or for whatever reason, have tried to jump into field-based sports, have come up short. And Usain Bolt, Central Coast Mariners last week, you see him, this is the fastest man who's ever lived, not being able to keep up with the ball that was passed just in front of him. This is a guy that runs like Vmax of 12.4. Why is he not looking so fast all of a sudden? And it's because he spent until the age of 30 not really being in that world of processing that sensory information. So yes, a long answer of yes, it's absolutely massive. And I think what we have to do as strength coaches, let's not use the word strength coach, as an athletic performance coach, a coach who's interested in performance on the field, you have to do a really careful job of working with your sport coaches to make sure that you are only presenting your athletes with relevant, pertinent sensory information, because they are going to link that information with a subsequent action. So this is why the SAQ bouncy ball stuff is not going to get it done, because it's just not relevant. It has to be sport position skill specific for you to fully realize agility on the field of play, in my opinion.
Oh no, right on. Have you you were talking about Federer and table tennis. Have you read the book Bounce, Keir?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, I was like, it must be coming from somewhere, right? Like yeah.
He gets a lot of criticism in terms of his journalism. I think, with I won't get into it, but like I disagree with a lot of what he says, but that to me is a good example of athletic ability is not just transferable between sports. Michael Jordan was a lot better basketball player than he was a baseball player.
Yeah.
Same with Bo Jackson in football,
Yeah, when you said Federer, I was thinking about that point in the book where it's like the guy who wrote the book, who was the table tennis guy, played Federer, the tennis guy, and like some archaic, like it was almost like tennis on a squash-sized court or something weird, and they both sucked because it was just all the perception was totally different. Like it's just it's amazing, and even within a racket sport, right? Like how specific those.
In the combat sports as well, you see boxers and kickboxers come into MMA. And suddenly the stances are a little bit different, the timing's off, all that kind of stuff. And it's really, really interesting just to see how a small change changes everything.
Yeah, timing and like sensation and perception is just such I think it's a huge rabbit hole, but I think it's super underrated, and just how little things can make that difference. But you think about that, just how you can change the drill set that you're using to put an athlete in a slightly different position to react could have a big change for them, especially if you're we're able to study their film and say, okay, when your feet are here, it doesn't end up so well for you, or something like that. I don't know. But
repetition without repetition.
Yeah. Oh, right on. I like too. It's like the difference between the amateur and the pros. You mentioned like maybe they have the same speed, like 40 time, but that's not the difference maker. I always felt like the combine was almost more like where strength coaches got to be track coaches for a few months, and. Which is awesome.
It's a meat market, but it's like, until not even in the most important speed positions, the fastest guy is not getting first pick. So it's like Malcolm Gladwell talks about in Outliers. How tall do you have to be to play in the NBA? 6 something. If you're 9 feet tall, does that mean you're going to be the world's best player? No, because it's like you have to achieve the minimum standard. This is what Fergus Connolly talks about. Physically, you have to achieve the minimum standard to just survive in the league, and then other factors are really going to be the difference in how good of a player you're going to be. And in rugby, I've worked at every single league from the World Cup all the way down to like grassroots amateur, and it's like there are big, strong, fast guys at every single level of the game. Obviously, there are more in the pros, but the difference is. The best guys are PhDs in their sport.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Yeah. Yeah, it's like the comment is just to get your foot in the door. I always felt like you just have to run that time to get your foot in the door. To be, I mean, no one who runs a 5.2 is going to be a running back, but in the NFL.
Yeah.
But, once you have that speed, I totally agree. I think that's really cool stuff. It's just really cool to see how that's all. I mean, once we know what to expect, it makes a huge difference. Otherwise, it's just kind of like, well, I got, my athlete as fast and strong as I could. I did my job. Cool. Like, and to be able to put together pieces to really like look beyond that, I think is really a big part of where this industry is certainly headed. And so I guess, the original way too, if you have a lot of the skills growing up, it would just be like the small sided games, like playing futsal. Like if you're a kid in Brazil and maybe you have all these physical competencies because you've just been playing your whole life, right? Like, and you have the soft skills, I guess, like then.
Well, that's the thing, have you ever interviewed James Smith?
Which one?
Governing Dynamics of Coaching.
Oh yeah. I haven't read that book, but I've
Okay.
it's on the long to-do list to read.
He is a genius. He is the Rain Man of physical preparation and sport performance. He doesn't like to be called a strength coach now. Like, he likes to be called a sport consultant. But his argument is that to achieve elite sporting success, you just need two things. One is a population base, and the second is sporting culture. Because if you have a big enough population, you're going to get the freaks anyway. If you have the sporting culture, you are going to direct your naturally gifted athletes towards that sport anyway. So, for example, if you could have the genetics to be the world's best freestyle wrestler, if you're born in the UK, good luck. If you're born in Central Asia or Russia, now you're onto something. And it's like, if you're a sprinter, you want to be born in Jamaica. So it's like you really just need those two things, and then everything else is almost like a secondary detail.
Yeah, I don't know how many bears there are to wrestle in the UK, Keir. I mean, you know better than me.
not many.
All right, on. That actually makes me think of the next question I had in line for you too, and I think I've seen you do similar things. But you talked about MMA, but like the use of like grappling type work for contact or collision sports. What's your thoughts on that, or as a tool or a training mechanism, or even just something you can do for fun to warm up? Like, how do you utilize that stuff?
So, again, to quote James, what is specialized physical preparation for field-based sports? And it's normally, well, there's a few different things. My thing is, if you had to write down on a postcard what it is you do better than anyone else in the field of play, that's probably SPP for your position. James's is what do you get most tired doing on the field of play? Because it's going to be high intensity actions, and low intensity action is not the difference between athletes. It's high intensity sporting action. And if you look at that, the answer in rugby, and probably not American football as much because you have guys that only play on one side of the ball, but in rugby, you get most tired fighting or running into other people and sprinting. So if you want to be as robust as possible to the demands of the environment, you have to maximize your outputs in those two activities. And a colleague of mine, Tom Farrow, we used to work together at London Wasps, he's a freestyle wrestler in his spare time and also an excellent athletic performance coach. He's head of England Rugby Sevens, who came second in Rio. He wasn't in charge then, but he is now. He came into our team in Japan as a grappling consultant, and his concepts on grappling for team sports are absolutely excellent. And it's the same concepts as sprinting. There are going to be a certain amount of movement patterns that you have to use in the sport of rugby, in the grappling environment, that you must be able to solve sporting problems with. You have to be adaptable to a changing environment, which is going to be what your opponent's doing. And it's a skill that must be learned. So the curriculum that we came up with was, well, firstly, can you control your own body in space in basic gymnastic, crawling type patterns? Because if you cannot control your own body in space, you've not earned the right to try and manipulate somebody else's. All right? So once you've done that, then you have to say, well, if I can move my body in space, execute a variety of different movement patterns to respond to an unpredictable environment. Now I have to take those skills, open the environment, and try to adapt them to solve problems that we're going to find in the sport. So in rugby, let's say we're tackling. There's going to be the tap tackle, the low tackle, the chop tackle, tackle at, kind of around the waist, a choke tackle, which is where you try and lift them up off the floor. There may be a snap down because your opponent's facing down. These are all skills that have to be mastered. First at slow speed with a low level of complexity or competition from the opposition, and then you speed it up and it gets more difficult. And we're still putting you in an environment where you have to exhibit the behavior that I want to see. Then I'm going to put you into a drill situation. So now maybe you have to pay attention to the guy running at you, his support player, where you are in space, what the most appropriate action is for you to solve that problem. And we'll keep doing that. And then once I can do it successfully in a drill situation, then I'm going to put you in a game variation where I don't say, Joel, I want you to do this skill, or I've put you in a situation where you have to use the skill that I want to see. I'm putting you in a game situation where I've just presented you with a problem. You have to solve it, and you're going to discover for yourself what the best solution is based on your personal style, your strengths, your weaknesses, and all those different factors. And that's the grapple curriculum. It's very, very similar to the speed curriculum. And that's because we're trying to have consistent themes throughout everything that we're doing relative to where we are in the preparation of the year of the athlete's career.
Oh, that's awesome, man. I love how you link that to the different types of hits and blocks. And then it's just something too I notice every time you have in the weight room, there's contact in the weight room, the energy just is completely different. Or even just partners resisting each other on barbells, as simple as that. Even just that, it's like if there's human interaction, one person against the other, totally different energy. And that's something
I started jiu-jitsu. I quit rugby 2 years ago just because of work and all that kind of stuff. Switched to jiu-jitsu, and that, the first few weeks where you're like, I know I'm stronger than this guy. I just got manhandled by this 135-pound Japanese guy. And I'm like, something is not right here. And then you realize, damn, this strength is taking me just so far and then no further. And if you think you've got athletes that have to be able to apply these skills in a game, the weight room alone is not going to cut it. And let's say, good game by a defensive player in American football, 15 tackles, 15 reps is, relying on those 15 reps once a week to make you a master of those skills, not going to cut it. You need to dedicate time in the training week to master it. And the weight room is not going to do it.
Yeah. The way we apply collisions in sport, it's the skill of that, I think, could really be dug into. But that's really cool what you're doing with that. I like how I almost think of there's different forms of fitness, whatever, CrossFit and all these things. It's the Metcon could be fight and run, fight and run, fight and run. Yeah. That's basically rugby, right? That's kind of
running and fighting. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that way of thinking of it, though. Cool stuff, Keir. All right, so actually, I remembered something I was going to say, because my next thought and what I was going to talk to you about was a little bit of data tracking and GPS. And obviously, you were talking about energy systems, how the energy flows. Well, I was thinking we were back to what we were saying before is, the combine. I remember seeing on the GPS is crazy now. You see how fast players run in practice in the game, and that's awesome. And it was Leonard Fournette had 22 miles an hour that 1 week. And I remember he ran 450 or 449 the combine, which is good, but it's what about those guys who ran 430? And I'm you throw pads on someone and they're in the game and you have the adrenaline of the game. And I'm how different is this? It's just so interesting to me.
That's the value of that, the sports science tech now, is because, to mention JP again, because we went to dinner in Tokyo, and I was like, well, this Franz Bosch stuff is great. The idea, what he talks about in the book, some of the ideas make sense. Where are the numbers to back it up? And he said, well, I've got those numbers because I've got all the peak axle values from Catapult for Japan for all of the years that we've done it. And he said, X player, I won't mention his name, X player will achieve this many meters per second when we do these drills. And when we don't, he doesn't. And that's really, really useful. And interestingly, if you, in my experience, if you want to see rugby athletes run slower, put them by the gates. Put put them in a situation by themselves and say, run as fast as you can between this point and this point. Because again, psychologically, that's an environment that you put them in that they are not used to, not robust to. So, a colleague of mine from London Wasps back in the day, Sam Portland, he actually has to go through stress inoculation with his rugby players with the gates. So they do a speed session, and he just puts the gates out next to them. Doesn't switch them on, doesn't line them up, nothing. Just puts the gates out there so they get used to the sight of them. Then they run reps through the gates, and they're switched off. Then they run reps through the gates, and it's switched on, and they can hear the beeps, but they don't get the time. Then he gets them to run through, and they have to run to a set time that's below their max. So he calls it like speed gate golf. How close can you get to 1.8, 2, whatever? And then they run the reps, and then they run fast. And it's almost like they're going to run faster if you put them in a competition situation with the ball because they have the context, and it's a situation they're used to. And that may be one reason why you see a guy like Leonard Fournette hitting those numbers, because that's the environment that he's best at and the one that he thrives in.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that stress inoculation, and you mentioning when you throw the gates up for rugby players. And even for me personally, like, so I mean, track was my biggest sport, but I grew up playing soccer and basketball, and my coach had always referred to me as one of the fastest guys on the team. But when I would run the 30 meters in track, I was actually not that fast. But when we would do different acceleration complexes, like you lie on your belly and get up and sprint, or lie on your back and roll over and sprint, I'd kick people's ass who are way faster than me. And I think part of it's just like the competition would help me, that I was a little more agile. But I think a lot about as soon as the timing gates go up, if you're a more forebrain person, it's like, oh, how do I do this? Like, even if you've been doing it for a while. And I had this realization, I'm 35 now. I still go out and run, 10s and 30s and things and 150s. And I'm not far enough in the postural restoration rabbit hole to figure out why I keep tweaking my right groin. It's something I'll figure out, something to do with my TFL and glute med. But I often if I run a certain amount of sprints, my right groin will start to act up on me a little bit, and I have to slowly but surely stop. And then, but I've been messing around with the David Wex pulsars, and I find if I have one of those in my hand and I run, I don't pull my groin. Well, why the hell would I not pull my groin? Well, it takes me out of my forebrain, and it's like a timing sync. But then I'm like, I think that's the same reason that I was really fast at it's like, I'm just run, and I let my subconscious deal with the running, and I'm thinking about something else. And I think that's really powerful.
I asked Jonas about this.
Yeah.
I asked Jonas, he basically said, when it's time to run.
Yeah.
He goes, like, it's always better as a coach to shape the learning environment for the athlete to allow them to discover an optimal movement solution for themselves, rather than spoon feed and force them to think consciously about it. And he said, because when they line up in the blocks for the race, you do not want them to be thinking.
Yes.
You just want it to be pure reflex.
Yeah. Oh, right on. No, I couldn't agree more. And it's cool. I go back to like it's almost like you could use that inoculation. Like, okay, here's this timing gate. It's almost like, here's this way of tracking it. Does this make you slower? Here's this way of tracking it. Does this make you slower? Like, or just a process to make people, if you were doing linear sprinting, to a process of making it, as subconscious as possible. And I'm sure it'd be different for everybody.
I think stress inoculation is actually what people perceive mental toughness to be in team-based sports. I'm guessing it doesn't happen as much in track and field, but if you ask the majority of sport coaches what is mental toughness, it's basically rolling around in the dirt while somebody calls you the C word. But it's just the ability to execute or perform at your best under intense physical and mental stress. And it's not getting hyped, slapping each other on the back, or that kind of stuff. It's just being able to remain calm and execute under high levels of stress. And the way that you do that is like, how do you squat 500 pounds? Well, first you have to squat 495, 490, 485 and work your way back until you find, right, what can I do now and do it well? And the same is true of psychological preparation for sport. It's like, what level of arousal or complexity or distraction can you execute perfectly? And then you just push the envelope a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, until it just becomes business as usual. And it's a little bit of like a popular book, but I read Overcoming Fear, a Navy SEAL's Guide. And it's like, if you can't swim, don't jump in the pool and start running laps. It's like, stand in the water, lay down holding onto the side, put your face under the water for 10 seconds. And you may disagree, but I read somewhere that Asafa Powell is the most consistent sub 10 sprinter that ever lived. Like, he just had to turn up and he'd run sub 10, and yet Usain Bolt is the most successful sprinter of all time. And if you look at how Usain Bolt did in major competitions, that's where he got his personal records. Asafa Powell set his personal best and his world records in far less significant meets, and whenever it came to the big stage, he shit the bed. So perhaps technically and physically, he was extremely gifted, and the difference for him was that stress inoculation.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely so much to it, and I think that's where a lot of, sports psychology in general, but it's a systematic way of doing it, and I'll have to keep that in mind, just the way you run through the gates and stuff. And yeah, no, it's right. It's like I have athletes too, or what I was gonna say too. I was thinking about this is mental toughness. I'm glad you brought that up, because I heard this. It's like the mental toughness is, or whatever that means, right? But I guess what we think it is so context specific. Like,
Absolutely.
I mean, I train swimmers, and I'm not a swimmer by trade, but I'll jump in the pool and try to swim, and I have an engine. Like, I mean, I was always one of the guys on the court a basketball court who could really go for a long time, and one time I was a sprinter and jumper in track, but I jumped in a 5K one time because I got like badgered into it. And I ran under 20. It sucked. It was like literally one of the worst things I ever did. But I'll jump in the pool, and man, I can't do shit, man. Like, I mean, I'm not saying like even from a swimming perspective, because I work with coaches where I can get my stroke okay, but it's just the comfort with the water, like the comfort level with being tired and being out of breath in the water, especially the breathing, is just, it's on another level, man.
I went to a Muay Thai class. The guy was a pro fighter. And he said, "What do you do?" And I told him, and he went, "Oh, you'd never catch me on one of those rugby pitches." I was like, "Dude, you literally get locked in a cage with another guy who's trying to effectively kill you." And he's like, "Nah, rugby's not for me." It's really, really specific to the situation. James uses the analogy of like a Navy SEAL and a cage fighter. If you take Conor McGregor, who displays immense mental toughness and resiliency in the cage, if you stick him in a plane and throw him out the middle of nowhere in the pitch black, it's not going to go well, and vice versa. It's what you become used to is what you become mentally tough to.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Yeah, I was actually, that example you gave, I was just gonna say like the same thing I'd heard. Like, yeah, Navy SEAL would say like I'm tough at what I do, but if you throw me on the football field, I'm probably not going to be as good. Likewise, you guys aren't going to be as good with my job, being mentally tough. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, you mentioned this before. This might be the last thing I think we can get to today. But you mentioned the Prius versus the Bugatti or Ferrari.
The Hilux.
The Hilux, I guess. Insert whatever car. Yeah, I think the Prius is always the one that gets shit on, kind of as the, you know,
it's a little bit greener.
I mean, I live in Berkeley, California. So a lot of Priuses around here. A nice car. But so anyways, robust versus, one of the things I'm always asking is robust versus optimal, and then like, you know, health versus performance, right? Like, I mean, if I'm working with swimming or track and field, like, I want you guys to be as fast as you can. Cool. Like, right on. But like, you're working with team sports. I mean, obviously you want them to get faster and you know, jump higher and cut harder, right? But like, what's one of the things I think about a lot is like showing people the opposite, like showing athletes the opposite. Like, if you're always on the inside edge of your foot and the ball of your foot in your sport, always making cuts, like, do I need to show you, showing you your heels or something, show you something that's different? So I guess what I'm saying is, in the process of making athletes more like a Prius, what are some considerations for kind of keeping things more level with them?
I think cross training, getting out of the cycle of always doing the same stuff again and again is very, very important. I think just in general, if like always doing the same stuff, always eating the same stuff, having the same habits is not good in general. It's like, here's another Talib example. Like the body craves variability. So in ICUs, if you put people on respirators and you keep the pressure at a constant value every single day, every minute, every hour, the rate of pneumonia is actually much, much higher than if it undulates and goes up and down. Same in movement. one of the main criticisms of the Smith machine is it doesn't allow for movement variability, and you're just going through the same motor pattern again and again, stressing the same tissues, and you're going to incur injury. I think people eat the same foods all the time. I read that it's going to increase sensitivities or intolerances. So it's just having variability in there, and again being robust, because effectively we're talking about specialization. And this has been a big thing for me with programming this year. I got to meet Mladen Jovanovic after something like 10 years. We hung out in Argentina, and I took on board his ideas about agile periodization and agile programming. And it's what he talks about with that is mixing up what you're doing and presenting a novel stimulus to the body is probably the route to go in terms of training. But the trick is how you do it and not turn it into CrossFit. There has to be a method to the periodization. I have to say, I'm lighter now than I was 7-8 years ago. I'm much stronger now than I was then, actually it's been a very, very productive way of training for me. But I actually repeat the same session maybe once every, in terms of rep schemes and exercises, maybe once every 6 months. It's that different, and I seem to be responding to it quite well. So again, it just boils down to the thing of how do you specialize at a few things while still being robust at everything.
Yeah, that's something I think of a lot in context of like the Bondarchuk system, right? Because that's the polar opposite, and that's obviously you only are doing one thing. You are throwing the hammer or the shot, or maybe you throw two things, but
non-volatile environment though.
Yeah,
but even then, in the throws, you could argue, what about wind? What about wet surface? What about if you cut your hand, you have to change your grip? What about a new glove? All that kind of stuff. Those, hopefully, if you're going to be a high-performing thrower, you're going to have to be able to work in those conditions.
Yeah, I do think that there is something when you have an external object that you're training, that's your sport, there's more variability inherent in that. Like a discus, like the motor map, your brain has to kind of map that discus in your hand too. There's a little bit more going on than just sprinting that you've done your whole life from age 2, and there's less things. So I've always felt like, because I've heard that system works, the best for throwers, and then people try it for sprinting and other things, but I don't know that if it worked amazingly, I think it would have taken on a little more. And so I'm always looking at like that, yeah, like with the, because I mean I'm a huge variability guy. I mean I'm definitely a big, if anything on the small end, I use 2-week cycles instead of one. That's my grand moment. It's just don't repeat a workout for 2 weeks, and I'd start there. And I like that. I think it works a lot better than doing the same workout every week and deloading a 4th week or whatever, like the typical is, at least in my experience.
Yeah, and I've Uncle Mike Boyle, he's been right about many things. You don't need to squat, and another thing he was right about is periodization is effectively natural. Yeah. Life is going to present you with deloads, with heavy loads, all that kind of stuff. There has to be some kind of planning and logic to it, but he was absolutely right about that as well. He's wrong about how aerobics make you slow, fat, and weak, but we've had that discussion.
Yeah. No, right. I mean, yeah, shoot. Like I always say, if you're too rigid in your periodization and you and coaching and everything's super rigid, eventually you're probably going to get hurt, and there's your deload, and then you'll probably set a PR after you'll come off your injury. It's happened to me multiple times. I've seen it.
Look at the kids here. In 3 weeks, they're going to have finals. Guess what we're going to do in training? We're probably not going to push as hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. All right, Keir. Well, hey, I think that's all the questions I had today, but I love it, man. Awesome talking to you, catching up, finally being able to connect. So really cool stuff, because it's going to give me a lot of things to think about, and I love the integration to a lot of like Taleb and just and life in general to the training. So very cool today. Thank you.
Mate, my pleasure.
That does it for another episode. Thanks for being on this journey with us through 125 episodes. I see these quarter gradients on the century scale, and it's hard to believe we've come so far, but I think of all the knowledge that's gone through this show and the guests who have really blessed me by being here and a part of it, and it's just awesome. So thanks for being on this journey with us. Please visit our sponsor, simplyfaster.com. If you enjoyed the show, rate us or leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher, and we'll see you guys next week with a Q&A featuring myself. I'm excited to answer your questions, so keep an eye out for that on social media. We'll see you soon.